My whole existence was built on a lie my parents told me for 27 years. And a single DNA test didn't just reveal the truth. It shredded 3 families to pieces. My name is Mallory Whitfield. I'm 29 years old. For nearly all my life, I was told I was adopted. For 27 years, that was the story my family sold me. Then, one casual remark at a wedding shattered that story forever. A single sentence cracked open a secret that had been buried for decades. 5 days later, 3 separate families were in ruins. A DNA test laid bare the falsehoods that had defined my childhood. A letter hidden in a dusty attic corner revealed a conspiracy formed before I could even speak. And a half-sister, a stranger until that moment, suddenly became the only family I could trust. To this day, it feels like a twisted novel, but every word of it is the truth. Before that, I lived in a tiny town called Millbrook, Alabama. Everyone knew everyone. Folks knew your name, your family history, your church, and even the make of your truck. I grew up in a modest blue house by the railway tracks, with a white picket fence that my mother took way too much pride in. My mother, Catherine Whitfield, had a favorite word: chosen. She used it like a weapon wrapped in silk. She'd say, "We chose you, Mallory. You should be ever so grateful we chose you. We wanted you enough to pick you." When I was young, it sounded beautiful, but as I got older, it began to feel like a chain, like a constant nudge to remember I was an outsider looking in. My brother Benjamin was 4 years older than me. He got the corner bedroom with the best light. He always had new clothes, never hand-me-downs. He got his first car, a Mustang, for his 16th birthday. He had a college fund waiting for him. I got the tiny room next to the boiler, the one that got hot in the winter and suffocating in the summer. I got hand-me-downs from my cousins. I got constant reminders to be grateful for what I had. I wasn't beaten. I wasn't starved. I had a roof and food on the table. But there was a line drawn straight through our home. Benjamin was on one side, I was on the other, and the word adopted was the border that separated us. When I turned 13, I made a huge mistake. I dared to ask about my birth parents, just one casual question. That's all it took. My mother, Catherine, broke down sobbing. She collapsed onto the kitchen floor and cried for what felt like hours. When my father, Robert, came home from his shift, he found her there. He didn't ask what had happened to her. He turned to me, his face dark with anger, and said, "What did you do? I was just 13 years old. I only asked a question." After that day, I locked my curiosity away. Not at 14, not at 17, not at 23, not even when I finally earned my college diploma. In my house, seeking answers was seen as the ultimate act of betrayal. Time passed. I threw myself into my work. I studied harder than anyone could have guessed. I secured scholarships, juggled 3 part-time jobs, and lived on instant noodles and cheap diner coffee. Eventually, I graduated with a degree in medical laboratory science. I spent years analyzing blood samples, interpreting genetic markers, and conducting medical diagnostics. I was literally in the business of uncovering hidden truths in people's biology. The irony is, I never once considered my own. My graduation ceremony should have been one of the proudest days of my life. It was anything but. My mother decided to skip the ceremony to help Benjamin move into his new house, a house my parents had helped him purchase. My entire graduation was just one afternoon, but it was too much to ask for. Robert did show up, though. He drove an hour and a half after a long shift at work. He arrived in his dusty work boots, holding a cheap bouquet of flowers from a gas station. When they announced my name, I could see him clapping from the very back row. That memory stuck with me. Not because the flowers were pretty, they weren't, but because he showed up. Sometimes, in my world, that was everything. After graduating, I landed a job at the regional hospital in the next county. The pay was decent. For the first time in my life, I tasted real independence. I worked in the main lab processing everything from routine blood draws to complex genetic panels. By 27, I'd saved enough to buy a small house. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. Nothing extravagant, but it was mine, bought with my own money. No help from Catherine. No help from my grandmother, Agnes. No help from anyone. I earned it with every payment, every bill, every piece of furniture. Yet even then, I never once questioned the adoption story. It was the only truth I'd ever known. Every family has that one person who rules with an iron fist. In our family, that person was my grandmother, Agnes. She was 76 years old. She owned a sprawling 40-acre farm. She ran Sunday dinners like a 5-star general commanding troops. Every Sunday at noon, the entire extended family had to be at her farmhouse. Attendance was non-negotiable. You sat where she assigned you, you ate what she served. And nobody dared to argue with Agnes Whitfield. About 6 months before the wedding that would change everything, she gathered us all to discuss her estate plan. We were all seated around her huge oak dining table, the one that had been in the family for generations. She laid out who would inherit the various parcels of land. Benjamin was set to receive 15 acres. My cousin Emma would get another 10. The rest, she declared, would be donated to the church. Then she fell silent. I raised my hand nervously. "Grandma, what about me?" She looked at me over her glasses, a calm, almost gentle expression on her face. "The land stays in the bloodline, sweetheart." I felt the air leave the room. Nobody said a word in my defense. 10 people were at that table, and not one person spoke up. I nodded politely, finished my dinner, and drove home. I remember sitting in my car in the driveway, staring at the steering wheel for a solid 12 minutes. I didn't fully process what she meant then, but those words would later haunt every single person in that room. The only person who ever treated me like I truly belonged was my Uncle Frank, or so I thought. Frank Whitfield was Robert's younger brother. He was a carpenter, a quiet man with calloused hands and a gentle soul. He rarely spoke, but he always showed up when it mattered. On my 8th birthday, everyone in the family had forgotten. Everyone except Frank. He showed up at our door with a small silver locket. Inside was a tiny engraving, the letter M for you. He said softly, "Just for you." I adored that necklace. I never took it off. I remember my mother watching him give it to me. She didn't smile. She didn't thank him. She just turned her back and walked away. As I grew up, Frank continued to be my quiet champion. He showed up at my science fairs, my school plays, and my high school graduation. He even showed up on my first day at the hospital. He always found an excuse to be there. His wife, Colleen, was a different story. She was pleasant enough, but sometimes I'd catch her looking at me with a strange intensity. Not in a cruel way, but like she was holding on to a heavy secret. Looking at me, thinking, and then quickly looking away. I never understood why until it was almost too late. 3 months before Emma's wedding, Robert suffered a minor stroke. I was actually on shift at the hospital when it happened. I heard his name blare over the intercom. The second I heard it, I dropped everything and ran to the emergency room. I reached his bed within minutes. He looked scared and confused. I stayed by his side, held his hand, spoke to the nurses, and did everything I could. Catherine arrived almost 50 minutes later. The first words out of her mouth weren't, "How is he?" or "Thank God you're here." She looked at the attending nurse and declared, "She's not next of kin, she's adopted. I'm the one in charge." The words hit me like a physical blow. I had to step out into the hallway to gather myself. Robert survived, but afterward Catherine picked Benjamin to be the primary caretaker, not me, even though I worked in the same building. I swallowed my hurt like I always did. That night, my boyfriend Lucas asked me a question that would unravel everything. "Have you ever actually seen your adoption papers?" I opened my mouth to answer, then froze. No, I hadn't. Not once. A few weeks later, Emma's wedding arrived. Emma had always been kind to me. The ceremony was at Agnes's church, the one she practically owned. The reception was held in a beautiful renovated barn on the outskirts of town. A week before the event, Catherine called me, not to catch up, but to tell me my seating assignment. "Table 9, she said. The family sat at the front, of course. I was assigned a table across the room with distant relatives and strangers. When I told Lucas, he was furious. "We don't have to go," he said. "I'm going for Emma," I replied. "Not for them." The wedding day arrived. I wore a simple burgundy dress I had found on sale. Nothing flashy, just something decent. I clipped my silver locket around my neck and went. Lucas drove. The reception was beautiful, with string lights twinkling overhead and live music filling the air. People were dancing and laughing. My grandmother Agnes acknowledged me with a single curt nod. Frank gave me a hug that lasted a beat too long. Across the room, Colleen was staring at us. The speeches came, then the cake, then the dancing. Then Colleen started drinking. First champagne, then bourbon. By 9 o'clock, she was clearly emotional. She was hugging Emma with tears in her eyes, repeating how beautiful she looked. At one point, she walked past my table and suddenly stopped. I looked up. She was staring at me, then at the locket, then back at me. "Frank always had a soft spot for you," she said, her voice slurred. I laughed it off. "He's always been kind to me." Across the room, I saw Frank freeze. His face had gone completely pale. Catherine saw it too and started marching toward us, but she was too slow. Colleen leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You know something? I was confused. What?" She stared into my eyes for a long moment and said the words that changed my life forever. "You look exactly like Frank." I laughed automatically, the same way people do when they hear something shocking. People had said things like that before, small-town gossip, but Colleen shook her head slowly. Her eyes were suddenly clear, deadly serious. "No, exactly like him," she pointed to my face. "The eyes, your chin, that dimple in your cheek, you even have his dimple." My stomach dropped. Catherine finally reached us. "She's drunk," Catherine snapped. "Ignore her." She grabbed Colleen's arm and yanked her away, but Colleen looked back at me one last time. The sheer sadness in her eyes made my heart race. Lucas grabbed my hand. "Are you okay?" I nodded, but I was in a daze. We left shortly after. The drive home felt agonizing. I stared out the window at the passing streetlights and dark fields. Every time I glanced in the mirror, I saw my own face, my eyes, my jawline, my dimple. I saw Frank's face superimposed over my own. Then his, then mine, then his again. At a stop sign, Lucas finally spoke. "You're still thinking about it, yes. Do you believe her?" I stared out the windshield. "I don't know." As the car moved forward, I said something that surprised myself. "I spend every day helping people find answers through DNA. I've never checked my own." When we got home, I was restless. The house felt suffocating. I sat on my bed with my laptop and opened a website, a DNA testing kit. $99. Results in 7 to 10 days. My finger hovered over the Order Now button, then I clicked. Confirmation email at 11:52 p.m. One small purchase, one tiny box, and without realizing it, I had just set off the countdown that would obliterate the entire foundation of my family. The kit arrived on a Monday. It sat on my kitchen counter while I had my morning coffee. A simple white box, yet I couldn't stop staring at it. Finally, I opened it. Instructions, a collection tube, a sterile swab, a return envelope. It was all standard procedure. I was used to these kits. The science didn't frighten me. The potential answers, however, terrified me. I followed the instructions. 60 seconds. Just 60 seconds of my time to start an earthquake in my life. I sealed the sample, dropped it in the mailbox, and watched it vanish into the slot. Then I drove to work. The wait had officially begun. Deep down, I knew my life would never be the same again. The waiting period should have been peaceful, but strange things started happening almost immediately. 3 days after I mailed the kit, Catherine called me. That was bizarre. My mother never called just to chat. She called to delegate tasks or deliver ultimatums. But this time, her voice was syrupy sweet. "Hi, sweetheart," I frowned. "Hi, Mom. I just wanted to hear your voice." I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at it. Something was deeply wrong. We talked for less than 2 minutes. When the call ended, I sat there, wondering why she suddenly cared. The next day, Benjamin texted me, "Mom's acting weird." I stared at the screen. "What do you mean?" "She's cleaning out the closets, going through old boxes, throwing stuff away." That got my attention. Catherine despised cleaning closets, especially the hall closet, the one she hadn't touched in years. A knot formed in my stomach. The day after that, my grandmother Agnes called me. That was even stranger. She almost never called me directly. "Mallory," she said, her voice uncharacteristically warm. "You should come to Sunday lunch." I almost laughed out loud. Agnes was many things, but warm was not one of them, yet suddenly she sounded almost friendly, almost nervous. After I hung up, Lucas sat with me on the porch. I told him everything: Catherine acting strange, Benjamin's text, Agnes's sudden affection. Lucas listened carefully, then he said what I was already dreading. "They know something." I looked at him, my blood running cold. "What?" "Maybe Colleen told them what she said at the wedding, and now they're terrified." That night I barely slept. Then Monday morning arrived. At 6:17 a.m. my phone buzzed with a notification: "Your DNA results are ready." For several seconds I couldn't move. I just stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. Then I carried my laptop to the kitchen table and poured a cup of coffee I would never drink. My hands were trembling as I logged in. I clicked on View Results. The first page showed my ancestry breakdown. Nothing surprising. Then I clicked on the tab labeled DNA Relatives. And my entire world imploded. The first name on the list appeared: Frank Whitfield, listed as parent. 50% shared DNA. I blinked. I refreshed the page. Read it again. Then again. Parent. Not uncle. Parent. My biological father was Frank Whitfield. I wasn't adopted. I had never been adopted. The story they had fed me my entire life was a complete fabrication. 27 years of lies erased in a single second. I couldn't breathe. I stared at the screen. Frank Whitfield, parent, 50%. The science was absolute and undeniable. Then I noticed another name. Delaney Foster, 24% shared DNA, half-sibling. I sat up straight. Who was Delaney Foster? I clicked on her profile. She was 28 years old and lived less than an hour away. Frank Whitfield. My father. I sent her a message immediately. Hi, I think we might be related. The reply came back less than 40 minutes later. I've been waiting my whole life for this message. We spoke on the phone that afternoon. Her voice was careful, hesitant, like someone who had carried unanswered questions for too long. Was told me my father left before I was born, she explained. That's all I ever knew. I listened in silence, my heart aching for her. Then I told her my story, the fake adoption, the lies, the wedding, the DNA results. There was a long pause. Then Delaney said something that resonated deep within me. One secret child could be a mistake, she said softly. But two secret children hidden for decades, that's not a mistake. That's a system. She was right. And systems like that don't exist by accident. Someone had designed it. Someone had protected it. The next day, I drove to my parents' house. Catherine was at work. Robert was in his recliner, working on a crossword puzzle. I smiled, trying to keep my voice steady. I need to grab some paperwork. He looked up, his pen pausing. What paperwork? My adoption records. Something flickered in his eyes, just for a second. Ask your mother. She's not here. I started walking toward the hallway, and he didn't try to stop me. The hall closet was just where I remembered it. Top shelf, old boxes, Christmas decorations, layers of dust. Then I found it. A thick manila envelope shoved behind some old shoes, hidden away. It was yellowed with age and tucked away too carefully to be accidental. My pulse was racing as I carried it into the bedroom and opened it carefully. There were no adoption records inside, no agency paperwork, nothing. Instead, I found a birth certificate. I froze. Mother, Catherine Whitfield. Father, blank. The room spun around me. Catherine was listed as my biological mother, not my adoptive mother, my biological mother. I kept searching, my hands shaking. Then I found a folded letter, written in blue ink and dated 1996. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Grandmother Agnes's. The letter contained only a few sentences, but they were enough to destroy everything. Catherine, this is the story we will tell. She was adopted. We found her through the church. No one will question the church. Do not let Frank get too close to her in public, Agnes. I read it twice, then a third time. My grandmother had orchestrated everything, the fake adoption, the lies, the cover story, all of it. I photographed every single page, returned the envelope to its hiding spot, and walked back out to the living room. Robert looked up. Find what you needed? I swallowed the lump in my throat. Yes. I sat in my car in the driveway, gripping the steering wheel. Then I called Lucas. There were never any adoption papers. Silence. What? My birth certificate lists Catherine as my mother. Another silence. Then I told him about the letter. When I finished, Lucas whispered, "My God." I stared through the windshield, my vision blurry. No, I said. My family did this. That evening, I called Delaney. I found proof, a letter. I explained everything. When I finished, Delaney's voice was quiet. This is bigger than both of us. The next morning, I drove to Frank's workshop. Lucas waited in the car, parked nearby. This was a conversation I needed to have alone. Frank was sanding a table when I walked in. He smiled when he saw me, but the smile died the moment he saw the DNA report in my hand. I placed it on his workbench. How long have you known? The workshop fell silent. Frank removed his safety glasses, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Since the day you were born." I felt the air leave my lungs. He sat on a stool, his shoulders slumped, and finally confessed. Years ago, while Robert was away for military training, Frank and Catherine had an affair. One mistake led to a pregnancy. Agnes discovered it and took control. She said if the truth came out, Frank said, his voice hoarse, the family would fall apart. So you lied to me for 27 years. His eyes glistened with tears. Yes. I touched the silver locket around my neck, the one he had given me all those years ago. Frank stared at it. I couldn't give you my name, he croaked. So I gave you that. A part of me wanted to cry. Another part wanted to scream. Instead, I just stood there. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Who is Delaney? Frank's face crumpled. He knew exactly who I meant. Several years after I was born, he'd had another affair, this time with a woman named Audrey Foster. Delaney was the result. Another hidden child. Another secret. Another lie. Did you ever plan to tell the truth? Frank looked down at his hands. No. That answer hurt more than anything else. Not because he had lied, but because he never intended to stop. I gave him one chance. Tell Colleen. He looked terrified. Mallory. Tell her. His shoulders slumped in defeat. I need time. You have until Sunday. Then I walked away. Friday afternoon, I finally met Delaney in person. The instant she walked into the diner, I knew. Same jaw. Same dimple. Same guarded look in her eyes. We laughed nervously, not because it was funny, but because reality had become surreal. For 2 hours, we shared everything. Our childhoods, our questions, our pain. By the end of that lunch, something had shifted. I no longer felt utterly alone. I had a sister, a real sister, someone who understood. "What happens now?" she asked. I stared out the window. "We tell the truth. All of it." She nodded. "I'll be right there with you." Sunday arrived. Agnes's farmhouse looked just as imposing as always. White siding, green shutters, a long gravel driveway. Inside, the family was gathered around the massive oak table. Catherine, Robert, Benjamin, Frank, Colleen, Emma, and others. Lucas sat quietly in the corner. Delaney was waiting in the car in the driveway, ready. The folder containing all my evidence was hidden beneath my chair. Lunch proceeded as normal. Small talk, gossip, and Agnes's famous peach cobbler. No one knew what was coming. Finally, I stood up. Every conversation stopped. "Mallory," Catherine warned, her voice sharp. "Sit down." I looked her in the eye. "No." The room fell silent. I pulled the folder from under my chair and placed it on the table. 3 weeks ago, I took a DNA test. The silence was deafening. The results show that Robert Whitfield is not my biological father. Benjamin stared at me, his face drained of color. Confused. Shocked. I continued, my voice steady. "My biological father is Frank Whitfield." Catherine jumped to her feet. "This is nonsense." I calmly slid the DNA report across the table. Benjamin grabbed it. His face went white. "Mom." Catherine couldn't answer. I opened the folder again. I also found a letter hidden in the closet. I read every single word aloud. When I finished, all eyes turned to Agnes. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the table. "You wrote this," I said. She lifted her chin, defiant to the last. "I protected this family." "No," I said, my voice level. "You protected a lie." The room descended into chaos. Benjamin was yelling. Colleen was staring at Frank. Robert stared at the table, unable to move. Catherine was crying. Then the front door opened. Everyone turned. Delaney stepped in her own folder in hand. Frank went pale. Delaney walked forward. "My name is Delaney Foster." The room was frozen. "And Frank Whitfield is my father too." She laid her DNA report next to mine. Colleen's face turned ashen. She looked at Frank, her voice trembling. "How many, Frank? How many?" Frank lowered his head, unable to speak. That silence was his answer. Catherine suddenly turned on me, pointing her finger. "You destroyed this family." I met her gaze, holding my ground. "No, the lies did." Agnes finally spoke. "If you leave this family, don't ever come back." I almost laughed. For 27 years I had fought for acceptance. But in that moment, I realized the truth. "I never really had it," I said, my voice breaking. "You made sure I was never truly part of this family." Then Robert spoke. His voice was quiet and weak. "Were there others?" Catherine's silence was all the answer he needed. Frank was crying. Colleen ordered him out of the house. Benjamin buried his face in his hands. Emma cried into her husband's shoulder. The family Agnes had spent decades controlling collapsed around her in a pile of rubble. I reached up and unclasped the silver locket. The locket Frank had given me. The locket I had worn for 21 years. I held it for one last moment, then laid it on the table, beside the letter and the DNA reports and the untouched peach cobbler. "I spent my whole life fighting for a place I already deserved," I said. Then I walked away. Delaney followed. Lucas opened the car door. And we drove off without looking back. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Robert moved out within weeks and filed for divorce. Colleen filed for divorce from Frank. Benjamin retreated into himself and stopped speaking to almost everyone. Agnes was forced to step down from her church leadership role. The legendary Whitfield Sunday dinners were canceled. For the first time in decades, that oak table sat empty. Delaney and I became sisters. Real sisters, not because of DNA, but because we chose each other. Robert and I grew closer too. One day he looked at me and smiled. "You'll always be my daughter." Those words meant more to me than any DNA test ever could. A few months later, Lucas proposed to me at our own kitchen table. No flashy restaurant, no crowd, just a ring, a question, and the man who had stood by me through everything. I said yes. People still ask me if I regret it. If I regret exposing the truth that tore my family apart, I tell them no. Truth didn't destroy my family, lies did. All I did was turn on the light, and once the light was on, no one could pretend to be in the dark anymore. That's my story. 27 years of manipulation, one DNA test, a hidden letter, a sister I never knew, and the truth that finally set us free. If my story resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more stories like this. Share this if you believe that everyone deserves to know the truth about who they are.